Intro music fades in and then fades to background. So let me ask you something. Who's really in charge of your local hospital or your kid's school? Is it the mayor, the governor, or someone way off in Brasilia? You'd think there'd be a simple answer, right? Well, it turns out the way Brazil is actually run is this incredible puzzle of shared power. So let's dive in and try to piece it all together. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get down to the basics. What even is federalism? Then we'll look at Brazil's unique spin on it. It's a really interesting story. After that, we're going to follow the money, see where the power really lies, and how all this affects the stuff that matters in your daily life, healthcare and education. And we'll wrap it all up by talking about why this whole thing is so important for you to understand. All right, first things first. What in the world is federalism? Let's break down this whole idea of sharing power. Okay, so at its core, federalism is basically a system where power isn't all piled up in one place. You don't have just one central government calling all the shots. Instead, you've got at least two separate levels of government, say a national one and a local one, that are both in charge, both making decisions for the same people in the same place. It's really more of a partnership than a top-down pyramid. So what's the opposite of that? Well, that would be a unitary state. In that system, all the power comes from the center. Local governments are kind of like branch offices of a big corporation. They just do what headquarters tells them. But in a federal system, it's a whole different ballgame. Both the central and the local governments have their own genuine power, their own autonomy. It's the difference between a command structure and a constant negotiation. All right, now let's zoom in on the Brazilian model because this is where things get really unique. Brazil's brand of federalism has a fascinating backstory. It wasn't designed to bring a new country together, but actually to keep an existing one from falling apart. And this is a huge deal. It's where Brazil's path just completely splits from, say, the United States. In the US, you had 13 separate colonies that decided to come together and form a country. Brazil, it was the exact opposite. It was already one giant unified empire. So when it adopted federalism, the goal was to hold together by pushing power out from the center. And that single difference in why it was created has shaped literally everything since. Yeah, you can really see this fork in the road on a timeline. In 1787, the US is using federalism to unite. 100 years later, Brazil is using it to do the opposite, to decentralize. But the real game changer, the moment that redefined everything for modern Brazil, was 1988. The new constitution that came after the military dictatorship, well, it didn't just tweak the system. It tore up the old rulebook and wrote a new one. And listen to this, right from Article 1 of that 1988 Constitution. This was absolutely revolutionary. For the very first time, it officially put municipalities, we're talking cities and towns, on the same level as the states and the federal government. They became full-fledged autonomous partners. This created Brazil's really unique three-level federalism, and it put cities right at the center of the action. So what happens when you do that? Well, it sets up this massive dilemma, this constant tug of war over money and responsibility. I mean, it's one thing to give local governments more power, but if you want them to actually do anything with it, you've got to give them the cash to back it up. And just look at the numbers here. They tell an incredible story. Back in 1980, before the new constitution, cities controlled just this tiny sliver of public money, only 9%. But by 2005, whoa, their share almost doubled to 17%. We're not talking about a small change here. This was a gigantic shift of wealth and power, sending billions away from Brasilia and directly to local city halls. And that's the key takeaway, right? The 1988 Constitution wasn't just some dusty legal document. It moved cold, hard cash. But with that money came a ton of new responsibilities. All of a sudden, it's the mayors and the local city councils who are on the front lines, expected to deliver the public services that people rely on every single day. Okay, so enough with the theory, let's get practical. How does this whole complicated federalist setup actually work when it comes to things like healthcare and education? Let's take Brazil's public health system, the SUS. It is the perfect example of this three-way partnership in action. You've got the federal government at the top, setting the big national policies and providing a lot of the funding. Then you have the states, which coordinate things on a regional level, managing the more complex stuff like specialty hospitals. But, and this is so important, it's the cities, the municipalities, that are actually running the show on the ground. They're the ones in charge of the local clinics and family health centers you actually go to. And you see a really similar pattern in education with Fundeb, which is the main system for funding schools. States and cities, they're the ones managing their own schools day to day. But to stop huge gaps from opening up between rich and poor areas, the federal government steps in with extra money. It's designed to guarantee a certain minimum spending level for every single student in the country. Basically, the money follows a student wherever they are. It's another system that just has to rely on cooperation to work. All right, so we've gone through the theory, we've looked at how it works in practice. Now let's tie it all together. Let's talk about why this whole complex system actually matters and how it impacts your daily life. So what are the big takeaways here? Well, first, just remember that the government in Brazil is really a three-way partnership. There's no single boss calling all the shots. It's a constant negotiation between the federal, state, and city levels. And that means the quality of that clinic down the road or the local school, it all comes down to how well those three partners are actually working together. And here's the most important part. Understanding the structure actually gives you power. It helps you figure out exactly who you should be talking to or yelling at when you want better public services. Is it the mayor's fault, the governor's, or is it an issue for the federal government? And all of this leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. This incredibly complex system of divided power in Brazil, does it ultimately lead to more equality by letting local communities tailor services and by sharing wealth around? Or does it risk making things more unequal, where richer places can afford great services and poorer places get left behind? There's no easy answer, but figuring it out is pretty much key to the future of the entire country.